Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you all here today. Happy October. We were just talking about how cold it is and the hard frost that we had, some of us. So welcome. This is the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness Legislative Action Committee meeting for October. I'm Lisa Chapman, the Director of Public Policy. Really happy to have you here today. So just quickly, we'll go over our agenda because we have a great action-packed listing for you today. So we have our friends from Center for Civil Justice, Kelly Beetleman, Greg Abler, and Jessica Flint with us to talk about an equity impact assessment pending legislation that they've been working on that they'll tell us all about. Eric Huffnagel will talk about some federal updates and things going on the federal level and with our federal partners. I'll go through a few state updates and a few updates for Micah. And then we want to hear from all of you and hear what's going on in your area and things around the state that are impacting housing and homelessness. And just as a reminder, our next meeting is Monday, November 7th, the day before the election. So that'll be very exciting. All right, next slide, please, Eleanor. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest speakers from the Center for Civil Justice. Kelly Beetleman, who's the Executive Director, Greg Abler, who's the Housing Attorney, and Jessica Flint, who's the Health Advocate. Take it away.
Jessica, do you want to introduce yourself and then Greg, and then I'll go?
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Flint. I'm the Health and Nutrition Advocate at the Center for Civil Justice.
Good morning, all. My name is Greg Adler. I'm the Housing Law Attorney at Center for Civil Justice.
And again, I'm Kelly Beitelman. I'm the Executive Director. For those of you that don't know, CCJ is a nonprofit law firm that advocates for people living in poverty through impact litigation and legislative and policy advocacy. We also have a standalone commitment to advancing racial justice. And of course, my grandfather clock's going off at noon. Would you please advance to the next slide? It'll be done in a second here. Sorry about that. About a year and a half ago, we learned about racial impact notes from our colleagues at the Shriver Center. We learned that some states had enacted legislation to require an analysis of how certain types of legislation will impact racial and ethnic communities. And we decided we wanted to bring this opportunity to Michigan. So we started by developing an outline of how this bill should work in Michigan. What type of legislation should undergo an analysis. And we strategized on how to advance legislation that would require a racial impact analysis. The purpose of the analysis is to identify and eliminate unanticipated or unintended racial or ethnic disparities before a bill becomes law. So if an analysis discloses that there's a disparate impact, a legislator would have the opportunity to make changes to the bill and eliminate the impact before it passes into law. And we realized that if we truly want to combat racial inequities, the bill needed to require a racial impact analysis being performed on any legislation relating to the social determinants of health. Next slide. You're on mute.
The bills that will be analyzed are any concerning the social determinants of health. For anyone who is not familiar with that term, the social determinants of health identify the impacts that environmental conditions of places where people are born, live, work, and play have on individuals. For instance, people who live in neighborhoods considered to be food deserts tend to have worse nutrition than people who live close to grocery stores. Another example is that people who are exposed to violence are at increased risk of suffering from physical health conditions. And while anyone can potentially be exposed to violence, The neighborhoods most impacted are disproportionately Black and Brown communities. A racial impact analysis would aim to address inequities in any bill concerning these social determinants of health. Next slide.
So there's a handful of other states that have racial impact analysis, but unlike those other states, our House Bill 6340 is unique in that assessments are automatically done as long as a couple of conditions are met. Number one, the bill to be assessed has to be scheduled for a hearing in the committee in which it sits. And then next, one of the following two has to occur. Either the bill to be assessed has to create a new crime or amend an existing crime or impact sentencing or parole or probation, or the bill to be assessed must impact any of those social determinants of health that Jessica just talked about a few moments ago. In these other states, they have to be requested by either the leaders in the House or the Senate or some state legislator. Ours are done automatically, as long as it fits into one of those categories. If you could move to the next slide. So who does the racial impact analysis? We already have two nonpartisan legislative agencies that conduct fiscal impact analysis of all bills that get scheduled for a hearing. We have the House Fiscal Agency, and then we have, on the other side, we've got the Senate Fiscal Agency. Under House Bill 6340, these agencies would be tasked with also performing the racial impact analysis as well. The thought, we thought it made sense in that one, these agencies are 100% unbiased. They are nonpartisan. So when they conduct fiscal analysis, they do it through this unpartisan lens without regard to politics. And number two, the fiscal agencies already have the existing infrastructure and the relationships with various governmental agencies from whom the fiscal agencies will acquire the data to run the racial impact analysis. So of course, the fiscal agencies are going to have to staff up because their expertise is fiscal analysis. So they're going to have to staff up and hire necessary experts who can perform these kinds of analyses. So there's going to be a cost to this bill. And that's probably why it's in the Appropriations Committee. But we think it's a cost that is well worth it. If you can move to the next slide, Lisa. Who does or I'm sorry, how do the fiscal agencies gather the information? Under this bill, the fiscal agencies are given broad latitude and authority to get whatever data and statistics that's necessary from any source. I think from a practical standpoint, a lot of the information is going to come from the data and the statistics that are gathered by various governmental agencies, but the fiscal agencies, they can avail themselves of any source to acquire the data and the information needed to run racial impact analysis. So if the fiscal agencies request information from another state agency, they have to provide it. That they're not going to have a choice. There's going to be, very limited exceptions where the information sought might be exempt under state law from access. Maybe it's privilege, but those are going to be very limited circumstances. So this bill, if enacted, will hopefully force state agencies to do a much better job of, one, actually collecting the data and maintaining that data in a manner that makes sense. If you could go on to the next slide. So what does a racial impact analysis include? House Bill 6340 would require the two agencies to determine whether or not a bill might potentially have a disparate impact on racial and ethnic groups. The assessment must include whether the proposed legislation is likely to have a disproportionate or a unique impact of any particular racial or ethnic group, or it might find that it has a positive impact, which is a good thing to know. But this bill goes a little bit further, and it requires the agencies to set forth a description of the data and the statistics that they used to reach any conclusion. And that's sort of in the spirit of transparency and this notion of bipartisanship, that there's nothing political about this. But the important thing here is that the racial impact assessments they're educational. We believe, or we at least hope, that no lawmaker would want to sponsor a bill that's going to have this horrible negative impact on a racial or ethnic group. So what this bill does is it would inform lawmakers at the front end of any potential for that, as opposed to waiting until the bill passes both chambers, gets the governor signs it, and only to find that once enforced, this law does have this horrible impact. So the goal here is to head off racial disparities at the pass. But significantly, and this is important, if an assessment determines it will have a disparate negative impact, it's not going to prevent that bill from proceeding. The bill can continue into law, but what it would do is it would simply inform and warn of these potential dangers at the very beginning of the process, so that hopefully they can be mitigated or removed entirely. You can move on to the next slide. So like I said, 7 states already have racial impact assessments. 4 of those states require racial impact by statute. In the remaining 3 states, they may be required either by some legislative rule or at the discretion of the Sentencing Commission, but they are all in the arena of criminal law. But in our research, interestingly enough, we have found that for the most part, the racial impact assessment bills that were passed in these 4 states, they were passed with very broad bipartisan support. It was kind of overwhelming, and I was really surprised to find that. So we're hoping for that kind of support here in Michigan, but maybe, perhaps, hopefully not, the fly in the ointment might be that our bill differs from these other states because they do go into civil bills in those social determinants of health. But if House Bill 6340 is passed, we would be the first state in the nation that would analyze bills in the civil arena. Next slide.
So while we were planning the strategy to advance this legislation, we thought it would be a really good idea to have some examples of what should be included in a racial impact assessment. And we did that both to find a sponsor for the legislation and then to provide the House and Senate fiscal agencies with, kind of what we're looking for in these assessments. So we contracted with University of Michigan School of Social Work Program Evaluation Group, PEG, to make it a little easier. That was a mouthful, to prepare a sample assessment. And we decided to choose 2 pending bills to show a bill that might have a negative impact on communities of color or a bill that would have a positive impact. So we chose the payday lending expansion bill because we anticipated it would show a negative impact, and of course it did. We know that payday lenders target communities of color. In fact, here in Flint, there are more payday lending stores than there are McDonald's and Starbucks combined. And then we chose the source of income discrimination bill because we anticipated, and it in fact showed, a positive impact on racial and ethnic groups. And then PEG went a step further and they prepared a template too. So the template includes the various sources of data that the PEG group was familiar with or that they used in preparing the sample assessments. And I think it'll be real helpful for the fiscal agencies and for those who are interested in what they look like. Next slide.
So coalition members, like Kelly said earlier, we've been working on this effort for well over a year now, probably close to a year and a half. And as you can see, the coalition advancing this effort is made up of at least a dozen important public interest groups, legal services providers, and Native American tribes. Because something like this has the potential to be highly charged, politically speaking, we know that it's really important to grow our collaboration as we go. This is a long-term effort. It's not something that's going to happen this year, probably not even next year. But we really do believe that the more voices and perspectives that we have in our collaboration, the better chance we have to make a real go at this. And we're really happy and pleased that Micah is part of this effort. Micah has the experience and the positive energy that we need to move this thing forward. And of course, if anybody here believes that an organization or an individual ought to be sitting at the table who isn't already sitting with us as we push this through, please, by all means, let us know so that we can get them here. Next. So the sponsors. House Bill 6340 was introduced last week of July, and it was introduced by Representative Felicia Brabeck, and we were really excited that Rep. Brabeck sponsored this bill because she does a lot of her work in the racial equity arena. And as you can see, there's a number of co-sponsors here, but it's also kind of glaring that they all have D's after their names. Our challenge here is to get Republicans on board, to get them to see the value in racial impact assessments and really the need for racial impact assessments. So that's, we'll talk about it here in a minute, but that's sort of part of our next step is getting them on board. Next slide. So the very first racial impact law was passed in Iowa, actually years ago in 2008, and it was led by former Iowa State Representative Wayne Ford. And we've been lucky enough to have Rep. Ford help us through our own efforts here in Michigan, and he's been just very generous with his time and his deep understanding of racial impact assessments. And he's attended some of our meetings, and he's really injected our efforts, not only with his wisdom, but he's got this energy that's infectious, and he's just very encouraging. So he's lent his expertise, not just to Michigan, but to groups in other states who have tried or are trying to pass racial impact assessment laws. 3 weeks ago, in recognition of Rep. Ford's efforts nationwide, not just in Iowa, but nationwide, U.S. Representative Richie Torres out of New York introduced House Bill, I think it's 8795, I believe it is, which is the federal version of a racial impact assessment. And it is aptly named the Wayne Ford Racial Impact Statement Act of 2022 in recognition of Rep. Ford's work all these years. So this bill would require the U.S. Comptroller General, upon request by any member of Congress, to assess the impact that certain bills or joint resolutions might have on any racial or ethnic group. The bill would focus, like the other states, it would focus racial impact assessments on criminal laws and procedures for parole and probation. So since 2008, when Rep. Ford got the very first racial impact assessment law passed in Iowa, his idea of making laws more equitable has spread not only to the state, but now it's catching on at the federal level. And so we feel that now is a really good time to keep up the effort and continue this important initiative forward with the momentum that we've got here. So next slide.
To further our goal of getting this bill implemented, we're going to continue with the Racial Impact Analysis Coalition meetings. If you're interested in joining the coalition, please email us. Our contact information will be shared on the next slide. We meet virtually on the third Tuesday of each month at 1 o'clock. Further, please consider sharing our letter template with the House Appropriation Committee and sharing our prepared handout or flyer with agencies or organizations you think may be interested in joining us. After this meeting, we'll share our handouts with Lisa so she can share them with the group. Next slide.
No, I think, yeah, that's fine. As part of the plan moving forward, we plan on meeting with legislators to really sell this bill. Actually, we started meeting with legislators about a month ago, both Republicans and Democrats. So far on the Republican side, we've met with Representative Leitner and Representative Slaw, and just the other day we met with Representative Albert's legislative director. To be honest, I wasn't particularly looking too forward to the meetings with the Republican representatives, just kind of expecting that, to get the cold shoulder. This is frivolous stuff. We don't have time for this. But I do have to say that we were actually very encouraged with how those meetings went. Of course, they asked hard questions, but they were substantive questions. But they certainly did not dismiss the effort out of hand. In fact, they didn't dismiss it at all. And one of the encouraging things is that, a couple of them actually acknowledged that a law that appears to be neutral on its face can certainly have a negative effect on racial and ethnic groups when they are enforced. So getting them to recognize that unconscious biasness and disparate impacts are real things, we saw that as extremely encouraging. Because if you can't believe that, then you can't believe in the bill. Now, on the Democrat side, we've met with Representative Tate and Representative Carter. Representative Carter was extremely engaged in the discussion. Representative Tate was a little more measured, but he still sees the value in racial impact assessments. I think that's just kind of his style, to be a little more measured. But we're going to continue to schedule these meetings going forward with both Democrats and Republicans, and hopefully getting some buy-in from both parties. But at this point, all we're asking for, well, we're not asking for a hearing on the bill right now. We know that the votes just simply are not there. Instead, what we're asking for is for an audience before the Appropriations Committee, for an opportunity to educate them a little bit more. And speaking of the Appropriations Committee, we all know that Representative Hours kind of threw up his hands last week and resigned as the committee chairman. I think it's just really too early to tell how that might impact it. The way I see it, and I may be wrong about this, but you replace one Republican with the other, it probably isn't going to change all that much. But I know they are, Republicans are not homogenous. So it will be interesting to see, number one, what happens with the elections in a few weeks, if there's any changes in the balance of power, and if not, who's going to chair it on the Republican side. So we don't really expect anything to happen with this bill this year. So the plan is to reintroduce the bill as soon as possible next year and keep plowing ahead on what we expect to be a really long trip. So I think that's all we have. We'd be happy to answer any questions, or if you prefer, you can reach out to us at our contact information. shown there. And again, we continue to welcome new coalition members to the table. So again, if you think somebody's missing that ought to be here, let us know or have them contact us. We'd be happy to have more people. So
Sure.
thanks.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jessica and Kelly. Really exciting stuff. Cutting edge, you know, it would be great to have Michigan be the first to include civil laws as well. But Eric has his hand raised, and then I have a quick comment.
Sure, thanks. Thank you, Kelly, Jessica, and Greg for being here and sharing. Really appreciate what you guys are doing. I do have a question about what might be kind of the obvious pushback that you might get. I want to get your feedback on it, but one of them might be, well, this is something that will slow down the process. It'll get in the way of legislation, creating laws. And then the other would be a question of validity. You know, how valid is that kind of an assessment that's being done, da, 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 da. What are your thoughts about those two issues that might come up, and how would you address those?
In fact, Eric, Representative Albert's legislative director asked us that very question about, how is this going to slow down the legislative process? And, we just try to be real honest. I think at the outset, there's going to be a learning curve there, right? But hopefully as time goes on, they get better at it. The data gets better. The communications between the agencies and getting the data gets better. So I think the fair expectation is that, yeah, it might slow it down, but it's worth it. And I think that's going to be the challenge is getting them to see that, yeah, it might not move as fast, but it's worth it. But it's not all bills. There's going to be a lot of bills that just are not subject to racial impact analysis. And so we got to kind of figure that out too, and kind of go back and look and see, over the past 2 years, how many bills would have been assessed, and just trying to make it more palatable to them, for them. But yeah, I think it will slow it down, and I think we have to be honest about that. But the goal is to get better at it.
Absolutely. Thank
I
you.
have a
I also
question.
animated some comments in the chat, and if anyone has any other suggestions for other groups, and I have a couple, I'll chat with you offline or email them to you for other people that could join the coalition. So really appreciate your being here today. Oh, I did want to say one other thing. I think I read something that perhaps Representative Whiteford is taking over as at least interim chair.
Correct.
So she's great. She's sponsored an alternative bill around the, okay, Anna, one sec. Yeah, on the behavioral health integration stuff. And I actually had the opportunity to hear her speak and ask questions of her. And she's really, I think, a great, workable, common sense person that, so it'd be great if you guys could meet with her as well. She's from the west side of the state. So Anna has a thought about slowing down the process. What's your thought, Anna?
I apologize. They update things and
That's
I
okay.
cannot find my raise hand button anywhere. I'm on my laptop too. So in regards to slowing down the process, something that I have been just very deeply in and researching is how many individuals, and it's becoming so often, that are on death row and then they're being exonerated. And then there are individuals who have been shown to be proven innocent of these crimes who have already been executed. And if you look at the number of individuals, those who are wrongly convicted, either sentenced to death and then later exonerated after they have been put to death. If you look at the number of African Americans, and I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, sadly, when we look at, you're innocent till proven guilty, yet supposedly the law is swift, but sometimes people wait 4 years before they even have a trial. and then those post-conviction relief and the ability to even, and Greg, I'm sure you know, as obviously an attorney, process of how long it would even take to get an appeal, let alone how many times appeals when there are these new evidence of DNA, things that weren't available back then, aren't being even an option. I mean, people are in there for 20 years. So when we look at things being fair, just, equal, you know, nothing's already fair, just, and equal in our whole entire system when like that. On any process, I think if it helps us slow down and stop and get the right people or get the fairest, correct justice kind of thing. I mean, when you look at those facts, I mean, those are bigger prospects, but those are all very huge racial areas where we're failing in our criminal justice system across the nation. And so it just might be something that maybe for them to think about, you know, what's this thing is waiting to finally get the right top, you know, head of, you know, Innocence Project involved before they're finally. And I don't know if that's sense, but I see.
I think you're cutting out a little bit, but making the case for, even if it slows down the process a little bit, it's better to get things right and make sure we're being, you know, just and you know, fair.
And there's a cost to not getting it right at the front end. You know, not just a financial cost, which there is, but there's also this human cost that I think you're talking about, Anna, of not thinking about these things at the front end. Only, you know, 5 years later, you know, the state's defending, you know, a class action lawsuit. And so, yeah, great point, Anna. Thank you.
And so we really appreciate your bringing this to our attention and working on this and introducing it. And we'll keep our eye on it and work with you as you go forward and hopefully reintroduce it next year and garner more support. Any other questions? I don't see anyone, so maybe we can go, Eleanor, to the next slide, please. And thank you, Eleanor, for being our slide turner for us and our tech person. Eric.
Very good, thank you. Again, thank you, Kelly, Jessica, and Greg. Appreciate it again for you being with us and sharing today. I'm going to hop into the federal updates. Not a whole lot to report out to everybody, but I just wanted to let you know, first of all, with respect to the appropriations bill for fiscal year 2023. We talked about that in the past, about the possibility of members of Congress not being able to get things together after the summer break to actually take action right away, and the possibility of having a continuing resolution, which is actually what happened. So on Friday, you did see that there was a continuing resolution that was passed. Originally, there was thoughts that was going to run into mid to later December, but it is through December 3rd, which does give a fair amount of time, I think, for Congress to get together and try to land on some final numbers for the appropriations bill. It's unfortunate because we do know with continuing resolutions, even though it's a good thing and it continues programs, we know that there's a net loss when it's just maintaining the current levels as opposed to increasing to catch up for inflation, et cetera, et cetera. So the good news is we have some funding through December 3rd. The work will continue. Next slide, please. I wanted to give a quick update with respect to the National Alliance on Homelessness Capitol Hill Day event. We talked about it at the last meeting. It was September 14th. Just wanted to give you a quick update that there were 245 virtual visits across the country. We had nearly 50 people in the state of Michigan who signed up to participate in visits. It is the largest number that we've ever had get involved from the state of Michigan with any of the Capitol Hill Day visits through NAEH. Want to thank those of you who are on this call who participated. Really appreciate you being advocates. Some really great stuff done. So glad to see some people stepping up into some leadership roles in those meetings as well. It was terrific. Just wanted to also make sure that you knew that we had 13 visits with our congressional delegation that included both senators and then the representatives that you see below. We didn't have all of them included, just the ones that were listed there, but that's a pretty good representation. There are a couple of reps who we were not able to meet with, but certainly, as you can acknowledge, the collective power of having that many meetings on the same day can really have a positive influence on the budget, because that's really what we were focusing on with respect to our asks and our talking points in those meetings. So thank you all for participating, hopefully making a difference in moving the needle. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a segue then when we talk about that collective action, the impact that we can have with respect to the appropriations process. There is a national call-in day that is being put together through the Campaign for Housing and Community Development Funding. National Low Income Housing is one of those partners, and a couple of others who have gotten together, calling on folks to reach out to their members of Congress. Still want to make sure we're putting pressure on with respect to the fiscal 23 appropriations. We don't want to have stuff get lopped off as we get close to the finish line. So really encouraging everybody to reach out. Doesn't take much time to do. It's a pretty straightforward thing, but the squeaky wheel is going to get us the grease. So asking all of you to participate or consider participating in that way, urging the highest level of funding for affordable housing, homelessness, and community development projects. Next slide, please. Thank you, Eleanor. So this again is the list of priorities, the kinds of things that we have shared with you in the past. This isn't new, but I wanted to make sure that this was available to you. Next slide, please. I'm going to be, let's go back, Eleanor. I guess I was a little premature there. I'm going to be providing stuff in the chat box that will be some links for you to find out who your members of Congress are, so that you can reach out to them quickly, and some other information regarding these bulleted items, as well as the National Low Income Housing Coalition's current summary of where the targeted line items are in the budget with respect to the executive office's recommendations, what was passed by the House, what was passed by the Senate, so that you can see where each of the houses fell with respect to their levels of support for a number of key line item issues. All right, now, next slide. Thank you, Eleanor, second time around. Just quick updates. These are bills that we've talked about in the past, and I just wanted to let you know that we're monitoring these, and I hope to have these captured in the future as well. Just a quick update. Not any developments taking place with any of these at this point in time. I did want to talk about the Eviction Crisis Act and the fact that there was a sign-on letter, and we talked about that the last time, encouraging you to have your organizations consider signing on. I wanted to thank everybody that did participate in that. Friday was the deadline on it. So again, thank you to those who were able to participate in that process. Keep in mind, when you see no developments, that's not an uncommon thing, that we are at the end of a term, basically. So we are in lame duck session. There's not often a lot of stuff going on, that they're kind of hunkered down. Certainly the budget is a very key focus, and maybe the only thing that they take a lot of action on before the elections take place. So hopefully more developments next year when we talk about them reconvening in January. Hopefully these will be reintroduced, and we'll keep tabs on them going forward. Okay, Eleanor, next slide. Just want to remind people about Housing First. We talked about this during the last meeting, encouraging everybody to train up, learn about Housing First, or refamiliarize yourself with Housing First. And there are some opportunities to do that through a learning series. Talk to you about these series put together by the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and the Center for Budget and Public Policy. Sorry, that one isn't natural to me. I keep working on that. The three of those organizations have put some sessions together. The good news is that it was so well received and so highly attended that they're actually going to continue that with a series of sessions, a monthly schedule for the next year, to have opportunities to look at different elements relating to Housing First. So the first 4 sessions were done. I'm going to drop in the chat box for each session, each of the 4 sessions, a summary, the recording, link to a recording and the slides. So you'll be able to grab a hold of those if you're interested in checking any of that out. Again, the recordings are there. Great opportunity for you to hop on at your leisure to hear more from each of those topics. And I will also have a sign up for you, a link so that you can actually sign up for those monthly sessions as well. If you'd like to get in on the action, you'll be able to do that as well. Next slide. Am I at the end here? Where are we? Yeah, okay. So here's the list of the dates. We'll be getting that link to you in the chat box. And that is, I think, the end of my slides. Yeah. So anybody have any questions before I toss it back to Lisa for her to talk about what's happening at the state level?
Well, for me, and sign up be in the mail.
Sorry, Anna, was that you, Anna? You were breaking up
Yeah.
a little bit again there.
I'm sorry. Can you hear?
No, you're still breaking up. If you can put it in the chat,
Okay.
maybe I can
can
answer it
do
that way.
And I will say, thank you, Eric. I've attended some of those Housing First sessions that they've had, the webinars. They've been really, really good. So they're available to watch the recording, and I encourage people to sign up for these new sessions because it really covers a lot of different things that we're seeing around the state and nationally, threats to criminalization of homelessness and affordable housing, just runs the gamut. So really good, great information there. Thanks, Eric.
I'll try to answer your question, Anna. If you drop it in, I can maybe offline respond to it or type something in the chat box. But I think we're going to move on now. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to Lisa. What's happening at the state level, Lisa? Is there anything going on?
Well, there's an election coming up, Eric, where a lot of people are focused on that. So not a lot of going on with legislation, but I will say, firstly, for the source of income protections, we have a coalition that's been working on this, and many of you on the call are gracious enough to dedicate your time toward this. So I really appreciate that. We have a sign-on letter that we're actively promoting, hoping to get to 100 signatures. We're at about 78 right now, and many of you have signed it. So if you could please, I will put it in the chat. If you can send it out to your networks, to your colleagues, your staff. You can sign it as an individual person or as part of an organization. We really appreciate it. We really want to demonstrate how many supporters we have around the state, as well as we're working toward putting an op-ed together. And we have a great blog piece that we're going to post probably within the next week or so. So you can go to the next slide. Eric's putting in his link, so I will wait a moment and then put in the source of income sign-on letter. Really no update on this eviction expungement bill. So we can go on to the next one. And this is one that I've actually retired for a while because there really wasn't anything going on in terms of short-term rental legislation. But recently, last week on September 28th, it got on the agenda of the Senate committee. So it was passed on to the Committee of the Whole, unfortunately. And so we really need, the action alert here is to contact your state senator and voice your concerns about this bill. This really limits local governments from prohibiting short-term rentals. It limits the ability for local municipalities to regulate things on their own, as well as limiting really affordable housing. So it's House Bill 4722. Leitner is the sponsor, and we would really love for you to contact your state senator and say, this is not working. We need something else. And there was some other legislation that was proposed that was more moderate, but it hasn't moved forward.
Lisa, can I just offer with that? In my communication with my state senator's office, there has not seemed to be an awareness of this as an issue at the local level with respect to local governance and home rule, as well as the issue of the impacts on housing stock in communities and basically siphoning off housing stock, as we all have seen across the state. So making that phone call, I think, and voicing concerns and communicating those concerns specifically with respect to how this could impact an already tight housing market by siphoning housing out of the housing stock across the state is very important for legislators to hear. My impression of the communication that I have had is, well, we respect what you have to say, but, so there's always that big but stuck in there that makes you feel uncomfortable, that really erases everything they said before that they really at times are not listening to what you're saying. So I think we need to put the pressure on, and the more contact that can be made, email and phone calls, I do think that senators will get the message that this is something that is not just simply going to be pushed through quickly in the dark of night, because this was something that was taken up out of nowhere. There was no particular traction behind it or buzz taking place. It just got put on the agenda for that committee very quickly, like it was going to be snuck through. So we have to take action here and communicate quickly so it doesn't get away from us.
Thank you. All right, next slide, please. Just a quick update on the SARA program. As you know, the portal is closed, but local SARA administrators have the opportunity to invite applications from some folks who are actively in the eviction process. It's just feeling like the funding will continue at least through October until rental assistance funds are expended. And then local organizations will be working on housing stability services, which will be like case management for people that are still having difficulties, and also legal services. Both of those will be provided into next year, even after the rental assistance funding ends. And then MISTA is actually going to be standing up a small emergency rental assistance program, nowhere near on the scale, and it's really not pandemic related, with couple million of ARP funding, home ARP, and they will be probably rolling something out yet this month to let you know about that. And it's still in the development process, but they do have the funding approved. So it'll be a very small program. Next slide, please. Some quick hits. State of Michigan released their housing plan, the permanent one. And they are doing a road show throughout Michigan and all of the 10 prosperity regions to focus on new information on how state and federal resources can support the statewide housing plan and address housing challenges across the state. So they're going to include information on the Michigan Housing and Community Development Fund, which we call our Housing Trust Fund, which was funded by ARP dollars. They're going to have a discussion by the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development on housing needs and resources in your region, as well as hearing from the State Land Bank Authority about blight elimination resources, and MEDC about other housing and economic development resources. So those will be coming up this month, and you can check on Mr.'s website. I can put the link in shortly. Also, the missing middle application, the program application is being invited. It started September 19th. That program has 2 rounds, and this is focused on developers that are developing housing that will be they're calling it attainable housing. It's $50 million from ARP money. It's really gap filler money for housing that's focused on people that are in the federal poverty guidelines within 185 to 300%. And so that's maybe about 22,000 to about 40,000 for an individual. The first round opens September 19th, as I mentioned. It ends at the end of the calendar year. And then that is $15 million. And then the second round will start somewhere between January and April and end in the end of September, and that's $30 million. Okay, and then lastly, well, two more things. MISTA is also dedicating and got approval for some of the excess funding from the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. The second tranche, $100 million is going to be repurposed for housing development and rehab, so that's really exciting. And then lastly, CDM is working with the enterprise community partners to explore how the introduction of an equity lens and potential changes to the 2024 and 25 qualified allocation plan for the low-income housing tax credit program. We'll look at expanding equities in communities where the tax credit program are being utilized for development. So they're also going around the state and hosting 10 virtual town hall meetings. They're going to seek to understand how you are currently engaging with the qualified allocation plan process and affordable housing development process. And you can participate. You don't need to be a CDM member or, engage with enterprise. But those meetings are occurring between October 6th and 31st. And then Region 10 meeting is not yet scheduled, but is going to be developed that date very shortly. All right, next slide, please. Couple updates from us. We are continuing to do work around the election. We have 2 webinars coming up Wednesday this week and Monday next week, the 5th and 10th, focusing on voter registration, information and education, how to access absentee ballots, some of the ballot measures that you'll see on the ballot, as well as a candidate survey that we will be posting the results on very soon. Next slide. We're also sponsoring some training as we do every month. The 17th of this month will be Understanding the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA. And the 21st will be of November, Understanding the Housing Choice Voucher Program. These are both going to be from 1 to 2 on those Mondays, and they are free training. I also did want to mention that we are preparing for and working toward November, which is Homeless Awareness Month. And so we have a toolkit and we have lots of upcoming webinars and information that communities can access and help you plan your Homeless Awareness Month event. And I will put a link in the chat real quick. And then next slide, please. So I want to hear from you. What is going on around your community? Anybody? Good, bad, or otherwise? Anybody have any updates? Questions or comments? I see Mitch posted something, a webinar, long-term solutions and successful strategies. Oh, this is National Low Income Housing Coalition. That's the next in the Housing First series, I'm assuming. Oh no, that was the one from September 12th. Thank you, Mitch. Other folks. Well, I will post in a minute, and I'm going to post our webinar links for Our Homes, Our Votes, the election information. And I did also want to say we have a really great YouTube webinar. That's the top YouTube recording that was done in 2020 by Jocelyn Benson, our Secretary of State, about voting while homeless or assisting persons who are experiencing homelessness to vote. It's about a 5 or 10 minute video. It's very succinct and very short, and it's great information. So I would encourage you to catch that as well. I just put the link in there. Any other comments or thoughts from anyone? I don't see any hands up. Oh, one new message. Oh, Lakeisha, we are seeing an increase on rentals and not affordable. Yes, under the FMR. Yes, I've been hearing that Rentals are going up double digits in communities, and a lot of tightening of the market, the rental market. So it's really becoming an issue. Jason, thank you. I forgot to mention that registration is open for the 2022 Summit on Ending Homelessness. It is later on this month, the 24th and 25th of October. It is virtual this year, and there's some really great overall presenters and sessions. So encourage you to sign up for that as well. I believe it's $75 and really great 2-day event. So please check that out as well. Anything else? Thanks for those comments, folks. All right. Well, we will send information out from our call today. Thank you to our presenters from CCJ. Our next meeting is Monday, November 7th. And have a great week.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, everyone.
everybody. Take care. Have a great week.
Bye now.